this is a great store. So buy lots of books from these folks here. So Mindy, I'd love to hear a little bit about you. This book, I really enjoyed reading through this. It's fast paced. It's a lot of fun to read. We begin with this woman, Janelle Wolfe, at a hotel bar, and she's writing this letter to a new therapist, Lana. She's trying to recover these memories that sort of repressed. Evidently, she drove off a bridge 30 years before on what a fateful night, and is still trying to figure out exactly what happened. But and this thing kicks off with that. So this thing keeps going and keeps those pages turning. So maybe we want to hear a little bit about what you're reading.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just give you a taste. Thank you, Dale, and thank you all for being here, and those of you all tuning in through YouTube. Okay, so I'm going to read this short excerpt and just give you some brief context first. Janelle, the protagonist, as Dale mentioned, is recovering from this car accident. There's sort of dubious circumstances around what happened, and it stole her memories and ruined her reputation and really upended her life. Before the accident, Janelle had been PTA president, a loving mother, adored wife, business owner, and a real force in her community. And the accident changed everything. So the Janelle of today longs to once again be that accomplished past version of herself, the one she calls Janelle before. So one day, this was a few years after my accident, I realized it hurt to feel nothing. I couldn't go on pretending I loved my husband, Charles. It was too hard. So one morning I concocted a plan. I convinced myself it was a kind of mercy what I was going to do. When my children were at school and Charles left for his office, I walked down the street to ask my neighbor Tina for a ride to the grocery store. Tina answered the door wearing her tennis dress, crisp and white as paper, her tanned face betraying a flash of irritation. She didn't have time to take me to the store, but good manners prevailed. After all, I didn't drive. Everyone in the neighborhood knew of my tragedy and my need to be ferried around and looked after. Inside Winn-Dixie, while Tina examined cellophane chicken parts, I pretended to study the frozen dinners. Then I darted outside through the back employees only door, past the dumpsters, around mounds of rotted fruit sparkling with flies. Behind me, the store's back door squawked open, but I didn't turn around. I hurried across the vacant lot. Tina was right behind me, I was certain. 2 streets over, the houses grew smaller and shabbier, dirt-packed yards, chain-link fences, snapping dogs, dead cars. I knew where I was going. The gaslight in a strip mall at the bottom of the hill, the kind of tavern that was open at 10:30 in the morning. But first, I ducked into the alley and peeled off my denim shirt and stepped out of my dowdy beige skirt. Janelle Before's closet was full of stylish, smart frocks, and that morning I'd found a red sequin cocktail dress. I slipped it on now, so tight, so short, and crammed my clothes in my purse. Inside the tavern, black cinder block walls sucked up the sunlight, the stench of old grease, beer, the chemical waft of soap cakes, a whiff of urine managed to penetrate even my blunted sense of smell. A middle-aged man with a gray ponytail emptied a bucket of something into a drain on the floor. He scowled up at me. "You lost?" Why, no, I'd like a drink, please." He stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "What'll it be?" As I sat on the bar stool in tight red sequins, I wondered, what would Janelle Before's drink of choice be on a Tuesday morning? "I'll have a vodka martini, please, Mr. Olives." His hooded eyes went dark. "Martinis we ain't got." The sign above the cash register advertised a Miller High Life special. I put a 20 on the bar and ordered it. A plastic pitcher of beer arrived with a dirty glass. 2 men wandered in then and sat at the end of the bar. One of them thin as a wire hanger with a hard face. The other younger with the careless eagerness of a puppy. The bartender turned on the radio. Loud rock music blasted. Good, I thought. Tina will be horrified. That was the plan, you see, for Tina, panicked at losing me, to find me here, disgraced. But Tina didn't show up. That fact began to bother me less as the picture grew lighter. May I have a clean glass, please? I asked. My words came out thick and slow, my sight narrowed and blurred, but other senses grew sharp. The knowledge I was being studied, for example. The two men at the end of the bar had been discussing sales quotas. They worked at the satellite dish store in the shopping center, and the assholes at cable were killing them. But they grew quiet after a while, watching me. I stood up beside the bar stool. The room went swimming. The music, the ranting guitar riffs, I began to love it. Something about a free bird, a bird that can't be tamed. The facilities, I asked. The bartender looked up from his bucket of filthy water and said, straight back yonder, the door with the W. The women's room, filthy. I squatted over a clogged toilet, no hand soap, empty paper towel dispenser. I rinsed my hands and dried them on my sequins, scraping like fish scales. In the wavy metal over the sink, Janelle Before's glittery costume winked. I remembered the slingback stilettos I'd stuffed in my purse that morning. I took them out and slipped them on, shoved my sneakers in the trash can. I wobbled across the cracked tiles. When I opened the door, he was waiting for me, the cute one, the puppy. You okay? Looks like you could use some help. He held out his hand and I took it, steadied myself. There was decency in his brown eyes, well-bred consideration. Thank you, I said. He nodded. He wore khaki pants and a royal blue golf shirt with a name tag that said, Timmy, your sales associate. Could I call someone for you? I shook my head and then, still holding his hand, I pulled him to me. I did. Whoa there, he said and laughed. And that's when I felt it, a surge. I was her, in her skin, or rather, she was in my skin, Janelle Before. She'd come across the river for just a few seconds, a minute or two, and as I pressed my mouth over his bristly chin, his soft, sweet, berry mouth, his startled reluctance gave way. I imagined the look of shock and disgust on Tina's face. She'd be here any minute, surely. She'd tell Charles right away, and, well, even a man known as a devoted caretaker wouldn't stand for this sort of behavior. What man would? Pride, his pride. I was giving my husband an excuse, the only excuse everyone would approve of, to leave me. You see, I was setting Charles free. Timmy, your sales associate's hands began to wander up my back over the red sequins. I buried my face in his neck. I looked over his shoulder just as my husband came toward me.
So, and this book is sort of full of nice little scenes like that, nice, hot, steamy little encounters, but it very quickly expands beyond Janelle. And we do meet a whole cast of characters, Charles, we meet Lana, the healer, we meet the rest of Janelle's families, and there's all sorts of shifting points of view. So how did you manage all that? It's just, what it was, you didn't want to stick in one place, but what was your thinking there?
Well, you're right. It's the Wolf family, including the two adult children, Janelle and Charles, and also a grandson, and then the Rex family. And then sometimes I go into the point of view of some characters we only meet once, like caterers in the kitchen. And then of course, Lana, who's the alluring, menacing outsider. I felt like it was, so this is my third novel, and they're calling it a literary thriller, meaning there's a suspense element. So momentum and pacing was really important in the novel. And part of the way that came together was through these shifting perspectives. A serial narration where we hear from one character and then switches to another character, because there's some things one character knows that another character doesn't know yet, or they're withholding information. And so that way there's a couple of ticking clocks. One of them is a dinner party and another one is a wedding. And by ticking clock, I mean there's a time that something's going to happen. So there's a sort of a natural momentum that comes with those events. So I just looked at it as a puzzle, and all these different perspectives of characters was a prism sort of looking at this story and this conflict and this rising action. The other way I did it, and we've talked about this, was through the newspaper articles that are actually embedded in the novel. Because Dell and I were both, well, I still freelance, and so you're still a journalist too.
I still freelance a little
Okay,
bit.
but we were newspaper reporters and journalists, so we were talking about how it sort of comes natural sometimes to think about a character in that inverted triangle way of who, what, where, when, why. So I actually, for those of you who have read it or started reading her best self, you know that it starts with a short newspaper article that talks about Janelle's accident. The novel started when I was writing about Janelle, just sort of free writing. She's the first character that came to me. And I knew she was yearning. I like to write about characters who are yearning for something. She was yearning for identity. She had sort of lost herself in this traumatic accident that had happened. And the facts were fuzzy around it, dubious, and her instincts were people weren't telling her everything about it. So she was trying to figure out what happened in the accident, and I was too. So I just one day thought of myself as sort of a reporter on the scene of the accident 30 years before. She was driving a station wagon. She was going to the house to meet her husband at a couple of friends of theirs, the Rexes. They were in business with, and the babysitter was late, so she was coming alone. And then, so if I was a reporter on the scene, I'd be talking to the police chief. I'd be talking to any witnesses. I would try to find out what the weather was that night, what direction the car was going, what kind of evidence they were looking at, and what kind of evidence I feel like they weren't telling me as a reporter. So I actually wrote the article, and then that provided the facts, and Janelle would provide sort of the emotional context. I wrote a couple of other articles that I actually embedded in the novel as well. They're hard news articles about a missing person and the crime that happens. And then there's also, we were talking about this too, because if you're a general assignment reporter, you cover everything, right? So I covered hard news, I covered murders, and then I would cover like society teas. So I also had this reporter named Agatha Smoot, which we don't meet, but we only know her because she writes these women in the spotlight articles about Janelle and her frenemy, Marie Rex. And actually Janelle comes and pores over these articles as she's trying to remember what happens, and is trying to sort of reach for her own identity. So that the reader's experiencing Janelle reading the articles as well.
Yeah, and that works really nicely. So as a journalist, you only get to cover so much. I mean, and you have this allegiance to the truth when you're writing for a newspaper. And the cops don't tell you nearly much, but being inside the victim herself and then trying to, reassemble those clues, because, the book does build about what actually did happen 30 years ago, what literally drove Janelle off that bridge, right? But I do love that, the forward motion of the book too, that, her daughter Mara is getting married, and there's all this angst, of course, with any kind of wedding, but this has been tied up now with the redoing, the rebranding of the family business, Rex Wolf Staffing, and you have some wonderful characters, side characters who start really being spotlighted there. Reagan and Teddy at Rex, and Mara maybe has some some feelings still for Teddy, versus her fiance, and so this is a lot of fun here. There's a lot of stuff, balls being juggled up in the air. It's very admirable. So.
Right, and there was a lot of stake. It's also a multi-generational novel. It's really about 3 generations. The Wolves and their adult children, and then there's a grandson as well.
Talk a little bit about Speck. I mean, he's a really interesting character that you don't see a lot of.
Right. So he and Janelle bond. He is actually her step grandson. Her adult son is homeschooling his stepson, because Speck is well, literally on the spectrum and has been bullied at school. So he has this really special affinity for animals. He's enormously sensitive. And he also is really devoted to his grandmother, and they actually share secrets and have some shenanigans together that they don't tell the family about. So there's that sort of young perspective as well, and that figures into the plot as well.
And this is all very much a Southern novel. I mean, the feel of it too. But tell us a little bit about this town, this fictional town of Haven.
Right.
Well, why fictional for one thing?
Well, Haven is kind of an ironic name because nobody seems to be enjoying themselves in it. It is loosely, I would say, if I had to pin down what it's loosely based on, it's probably Traveler's Rest. It's right near the border of North Carolina. There are some blue ghost fireflies that are important. The family goes up right in North Carolina mountains sometimes. So gentrification is a big problem with at least some of the characters. Haven's is changing a lot. Mira is a bartender poet who's paying off her student loans. She got an MFA in poetry. And she's bothered a little bit about the gentrification because she doesn't see the whole community be included in it. So there's that aspect of it as well as far as setting. But it's not totally faithful to TR. It borrows a little bit from it. Yeah.
And it's always, I think, people misunderstand that, when a novelist sits down to write a book, maybe you're like me, I usually don't know what the hell I'm doing, this thing, sort of builds up. So you didn't have a grand scheme in mind. You really you said that some of the real inspiration for this book was like a vintage cookbook bookmarked with an article about Sandra Day O'Connor.
That's the first spark of the idea. Yeah.
Being the first woman,
Right.
Supreme Court.
Right. So I had this cookbook from the late 1950s, and it was full of those Jell-O recipes and what to make when your husband's boss is coming to dinner.
Yeah.
And if a man really wants to cook, let him grill. This is what he can grill. It's just really Mad Men kind of territory. And so it was bookmarked with church bulletins and all these articles. And one article that fell out was this very carefully folded and preserved article talking about how Ronald Reagan had appointed Sandra Day O'Connor as the first woman on the Supreme Court. And the article talked about how she and her husband did ballroom dancing, sort of her wardrobe. It didn't focus on her intellect or anything. But the fact was, it was really important to this cookbook owner, whoever she was, had kept this clipping, and it must have been inspirational to her. And it just kind of sparked the idea of that, and what advice would the owner of this cookbook, what advice is she giving to her daughter and granddaughters, and how is it changing? How is that changing for them? So that was the first spark of it.
And I love that. That's even in my own book, Kings of Coweetsee. I'm always interested in what women are doing behind the men.
That's right.
Men are always sort of after power and prestige and that sort of thing. Well, what are the women actually doing with all of this? So that's always interesting, and it's more sort of it gives you a bigger range as a novelist. You also talked a lot about that. This came together fairly quickly for you, didn't it?
Well, not really. I mean, it was several years from the first idea till the time I finished. But as I said, I started with the first person narrative of Janelle, then the newspaper article, and then the other characters around her. It was like a light was getting wider and wider and wider as the radius, because obviously her husband, I was finding out more about him.
Yeah.
And he's actually the antagonist. And then Lana, who is her psychic advisor, is the antagonist, really.
Right, right.
And from that, it was her adult children, how did they adjust to their mother being such a different person after the accident, and after, their own lives. And then from that, the town and other, it just kind of expanded after that.
And I think there's something really Southern about that. There's that web of connections that keeps going on.
All right.
And where does scandal come from?
Right.
Where we are headed back to some sort of revelation of the deep, dark family secrets, which of course happen everywhere, but we seem to be growing pretty good in the South here.
I think we do. And I think that we don't talk about them directly a lot of times. So they kind of sprout up when people are talking or gossiping or, the whole bless her heart kind of thing. But whereas in other places in the United States, people are much more direct, perhaps.
Yeah.
We're polite and also maybe evasive.
Yeah, Southerners don't like that direct thing. It's like I was always, sort of, when I was talking to like agents in New York or whatever, they always wanted to just sort of, you want to talk a little bit about the weather, how's it going?
Right.
Let's warm up.
Ease into the conversation.
Right. Take your time or whatever, but right. But this book, it does build. I mean, what's really nice about it is that those chapters do, come together really quickly. The points of view are handled, and we are driving towards some real plot twists. You think you might know where this is going, and even at the end, there's going to be a plot twist or two that you didn't see coming.
That's what makes talking about it, unless you've read it, a little
bit tricky.
A little dicey, yeah.
Spoilers, but so we can talk about how you actually sort of came into that, because again, it goes back to that notion that a novelist maybe not ever aware of all these ramifications until you write. You sit down and you talked in a recent essay about keeping notebooks as a writer. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I read an essay for Writer's Digest it's called the Novelist Journal. So I keep a journal for each notebook, which tracks the trajectory of the novel. And I consider it a conversation of the writer with herself. It's a tool of accountability, because I will write the date and the time when that day when I'm starting the writing process. And then at the end of the writing process of that day, I log in whatever I've accomplished, if it's word count or if it's just writing a scene, any audacious ideas I have about it, any obstacles I see, any questions I have that I just want to mull over. And then I will kind of log out. This is handwritten, but I always put the time I ended as well. And then I find that in the time between that and my next time when I log in, my subconscious sort of delivers some solutions. I mean, not always, it's not like little magic elves, but clearly something is happening where it's kind of like lucid dreaming, right? When you start paying attention to your dreaming and writing down, then you start remembering more of your dreams. It's kind of your subconscious and you have this deal where, when you're away, your subconscious is going to be working on this, or your creativity, or the source, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that you can also, it helps me figure out how long I've been working on something, like a chapter or a section, how that sort of aligns with my plan. If I wanted to do a first draft in 5 months and it's been 6 months, or if I wanted to rewrite a section, it's been 3 weeks, I can figure out how much time I've been spending writing, which times of the day or the month are productive. So it's a way of just this parallel work that is going on that's kind of corresponding with the novel itself.
And that feels like it goes back to a good newspaper training where, you don't get paid unless you write something,
right,
on a daily basis.
With the deadline.
With the deadline. So that's a lot of writing being done there. And, cranking out a first draft and, 95,000 words in 5 months, that's work.
Yeah.
That's hard work. And still you don't know exactly what you have then.
Right, yes.
And you have to
you
keep
don't.
going back through it, right?
You don't, and that's when my other essay, the synopsis is your compass. So especially, I do very loose, wild, crazy first drafts. I keep the editor out of the room for the first draft. So once I have that first draft, a way to sort of distill it or wring it out, to discover the essence or the heart of it, is I write a synopsis of it in about, 4 typed pages. And it's a way of condensing it and figuring out really what's really important in it. What parts do I want to write about? What parts are saying, yes, this is the conflict. Yes, this is what I want to explore. And that's not easy, writing a synopsis of something of all those of 95,000 words, but it forces you to make decisions.
Yeah, because let me tell you, the hardest thing for a novelist is
Yes.
writing this little blurb right now.
Yeah, it is.
Oh my God, give me 50,000 words, but 100 words, can I do it? It's like haiku or something.
Right. And I think Mark Twain said, if I'd had more time, I would have written a shorter story. And also a log line. It's helpful to write just a log line, 1 sentence of what your novel's about. That could take you weeks.
Yes. And these are things that editors, and the publishers are always asking for after you get the book accepted and you're heading towards the finish line here. So that work was never done. But also, like when I was reading around with some of the materials you sent, you mentioned some writing advice. It feels very pertinent. This is the best writing advice you've gotten at Swanee, right?
Right. So I was at Swanee, the University of the South, the Swanee Writing Conference, and I went as a fellow, and it was a great 2 weeks. But there was an editor of one of the literary magazines who was on a panel, and somebody asked him, what's the best advice you can give a writer? And he said, well, there's 3 things you're going to need: talent, luck, and pluck. And he said the most important is pluck. And pluck is tenacity, it's resilience, it's discipline, it's your commitment to the craft. It's reading voraciously, and it's just having this steady writing practice. And to me, that's held true. And that's what I think it's encouraging too, because pluck is the only thing you can control. You can't really control how much talent you have. You can hone it, and luck, but pluck, you have some influence in that.
Yeah, I had a writer friend who was a mystery writer who had something along those lines. He said, writers succeed who are too stupid to give up. Because the odds are so long about writing a book and making sense of it or whatever. So I think it is pluck, but we do this because we love to do it. We're obsessed with putting words together.
It helps to be obsessed with it.
Yeah. So.
And you also, this is really corny, but you end up, you're fulfilled by it, the process yourself. It's like an artist, painting in her studio, or a sculptor. You're doing it for yourself. There's a lot of satisfaction in the process.
Mm-hmm. So this is your 3rd novel and your first literary thriller, what they're calling it, or more suspense, perhaps. How different was that from writing in this? I don't know if I call it our genre or not. How different was writing this book than the previous ones?
I think, I did challenge myself to write a novel with a crime in it, and so that was different. I had to do more research on some things, but as I said, I guess the major change was the timing had to be, the pacing had to be, I had to spend more time on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that really helps with that journalism background. Again, doing those police reports over and over where you do actually have to go cover so many different crimes. And most crimes are stupid and accidental.
Yeah.
They're not any great criminal masterminds or anything doing. It's mostly drunken people or people in the wrong place. But it does allow you to a whole background of knowledge about how things work.
And you have to go out and talk to a lot of different people
Yeah.
about, and we'll sort of weave that into a narrative.
Mhm.
And you also try to be this narrator that's unbiased, right?
Or fair.
Or fair.
You're trying to get
Exactly.
across, you're not necessarily choosing sides. And that's actually kind of the fun thing about the book. You might have noticed it before is that good people are hard to write about, or they're not bad people doing bad things. It's hard for us to avert our eyes from that. We like reading about, Satan falling from, heaven and paradise lost, so talk a little bit about Lana. She does sort of come across as she goes along.
Yeah, she's the most wicked character I've ever written about, and it was really fun. All she cares about is herself. She's a survivor. She has a talent of persuading people. She's enormously alluring and pretty fascinating that way, but she has a lot of chutzpah. She presses things that you're just like, oh God, I can't believe you're gonna do that, and she's a chaos agent. So if she's gonna come to a dinner party, things ain't gonna go well. Yeah.
And that was fun because she makes a nice counterpoint to Charles. We've heard Charles in that opening there, and we meet him, very quickly thereafter. And he's not a fun guy, but he's interesting to read about too. How much he's been gaslighting his own wife for all these years, and what he's been trying to do with the family business. And but he winds up.
And Lana's a worthy adversary to him.
Yeah.
But when I had my book launch party at Edisto Island to kick off the book tour, we had it at McConkey's Jungle Shack, which is a fantastic little place on the beach, and they made a cocktail called Lana's Revenge for the book, and it was tequila punch, and it got sucked up real fast. It was good. Yeah.
Cool. So anything you want to talk about, Mindy? We're getting towards the end. Might start taking some
Should
questions
we
here.
take some questions?
Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Any questions, y'all, so far?
Shy.
Yeah.
We can talk some more if you don't have anything.
Well, you said something about Sandra Day O'Connor, but what really inspired you to come up with this whole premise?
So the question is, what inspired me to come up with the whole premise of the novel? It came, okay, so when I was writing about Janelle, and I knew that something had happened with, traumatic with her accident, and that led to her husband being very protective, but not telling her everything. And again, it just kind of led, as I said, just it's like a light just was like illuminating character after character after character. And the whole idea of marriage for someone, because Janelle is eclipsed by her husband and really by her father. Her father was a judge. So she's always been known by as a daughter or a wife, not for her own talents. So that's the kind of thing that her daughter's falling into as well. So that kind of, I was just weaving and weaving that. And I realized that in coming up with the title, Her Best Self, it refers to Janelle, but it also refers to her daughter, Mira. And it refers to another character too, which I'm not going to say because it might give away something. But so the whole idea of the Sandra Day O'Connor, it was just the question of marriage, relationships, and how women have changed in those roles was the general kind of theme.
Mm-hmm. And it does play there is a nice political angle to the book as well. The family friends, the Rexes, it's
Right.
a political family.
Yeah.
When I was a state senator, and so the son maybe wanted to run for office again too. So
Right, and it was like father's shoes. for
that's
gender,
right.
and
So,
then-
so this idea of how does marriage, fit into the politics? What is that political wife? What does she
Right.
have to do?
Right, exactly right.
So,
Yeah.
Well, this is sort of a different kind of question. I listen and I admire your person pluck. Just amazing that you could do this, but you hear some authors say, I always know the ending of the story before I start, diagrams and things like that. It seems like your approach is very different, sort of from part to the whole or something. And is that something you just evolved for yourself? Did your training teach you,
The ending, you mean?
well,
Or-
just your method of working, like journaling, like how you work with that journal? Are those techniques that you discovered for yourself, or does your training really present this as a legal?
So the question is, the various techniques that we've talked about, one of them is keeping a journal for the novel, or is that something I learned in training, or how did I come about
Yeah.
to discover those? The idea of keeping specifically a journal for a novel happened when I read Steinbeck. Well, first of all, I love Grapes of Wrath, but he has another book that's called The Writer, it's
it's a
called,
writer's diary.
yeah, it's his diary. I'm trying to think of what the title is. I think it's called, well, anyway, I can look it up, but it's his actual journal that he kept while he was writing Grapes of Wrath. And it's really encouraging because he's running out of money at some point, the plumber needs to come, and his wife's knocking on the door, and his wife types his manuscripts, and she's giving him, it sounds like she helped edit. So that's going on. He's talking about, he has these really dark bouts of discouragement. Like, this is just trash. Why am I wasting my time? I'm awful. It's like, and then other days it's, I gotta get it right. This is important. This novel is just coming through me. I've got to get it right. And you just read it. It's just the most fascinating sort of picture of what happened when he's writing this masterpiece, right? Of the Grapes of Wrath, and how it actually changed things for people in the dust, after the Dust Bowl. So that's just one example. There are other journals that novelists have kept, but I think it's really important for novelists, especially because, as I said, it's accountability. When I was getting in a Master of Fine Arts, that's not in writing. That's not something they mentioned. I think it's just a technique that a writer has to figure out
And I think
what works.
every writer really has to figure that
Mhm.
out. I did read somewhere that Somerset Maugham said, there are 3 rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. So, it's like and I think you have to get away from this notion that writers know what they're doing. They might say they do. And yes, I do know some that start with the last line. I think John Irving says he's not real comfortable unless he has his last line. That doesn't work for me. I keep changing that. Or if you look at someone like Hemingway, who came up with like 50 endings to A Farewell to Arms, So a lot of this is, again, what Mindy's saying, is trying to tap into the subconscious. That's where those stories start coming out of. And that was the fun thing about going from journalism into fiction. I mean, journalism is, a very necessary thing. And unfortunately, we don't have as much of it as we need now. But, journalism has this role, but fiction is able to go deeper into the psyche and sort of things because we're making things up. But I think we are tapping into the subconscious when we do that. So, and every writer has to sort of figure out her or his way. So.
It's called Working Days.
Working
Working
days,
days,
that's it.
yeah.
I knew working was in there somehow. But John Steinbeck, it's fascinating. Like, if even if you're not a writer, I think it's just amazing because it's capturing how he's building this masterpiece, basically.
Reynolds Price had a book similar to that. I did hear Reynolds when he was in town years ago, and he actually did do an outline to his very first novel. and knew exactly what was going on, and said he wouldn't do that again because then he knows what's going. There's not a surprise. It becomes more work if you know everything that's going on. So a lot of fun is just being surprised as you go along. It's like, I didn't see that coming.
Right.
And then you have to go back and rearrange it.
For me, the first draft, after I do that synopsis and I kind of have a general structure in mind, I don't do an outline, which sounds very linear, as much as I see the scenes that need to happen or that I feel like are sort of organically there. And I can map them out, and I may not know which order they're coming in, but that's kind of near, I wouldn't say an outline, but more of a map. Yeah.
I just wondered, that first draft, which you refer to as, sometimes it can be kind of crazy and looser. In this book or the others that you've written, have you ever then really greatly diverged from that? Has that, taken you to, you wrote your synopsis and then you went in a completely different trajectory, or does it all?
Not radically so, but I've cut lots of sections. Because I have a long stride and I tend to write a much longer draft than I need to, so I have to be prepared to cut a lot. So I do cut a lot. And the synopsis, and I don't do just one synopsis, so I'll redo the synopsis like halfway through or at the end. It's a guiding star. It's not set in stone. I think it's important. It's yin and yang, right? You've got to kind of know where you're going, but you got to be open to exploring. And so the synopsis can change too. It's a tool. But it's not changed radically. But some ideas I have, even in the second draft, I've had to jettison them. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, because sometimes not every day goes that well, and you do hit these sort of roadblocks. So sometimes, just doing the very opposite, you can put not into a sentence.
That's a good idea.
He did this, he did not do this. He loved her, he did not love her. So I mean, it takes you in different directions, in other words. So you're always sort of juggling.
Right.
I have a question.
Yes.
You were talking initially about that you write about women that you care, and you were describing those women in real detail. Has that kind of looking at characters changed the way you see women in this world or see yourself as a?
So the question is, how do I, writing about female characters closely, has it changed how I've seen them in the world?
Enriched it as
Has it enriched?
Has it been enlightening?
Enlightening. I would say yes, but I think it's not just females, all sorts of characters. You have to, I think fiction writers are constantly studying people, and you're constantly eavesdropping, and you're not very good house guest as far as you're always like listening and eavesdropping. And I'm saying that to our two hosts here that I'm staying with. So I think you're constantly studying what makes people tick. And in a family unit, I write a lot about families because, in the South too, in small towns, and there's this whole sort of ecosystem that's going on there. It's always really interesting to see the power dynamics in those systems and in marriages, and in towns, in families. So I think it's enriching generally, but I think it's also that same kind of enrichment you find when you read a wonderful novel that you sort of connect with, like Anna Karenina, who was like Tolstoy. He totally got women, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's literature, right? That's literature. generally.
And I think that's what literature tries to go into the human heart, right? So,
The heart in conflict with itself.
right,
right?
as Mr. Faulkner would
Yeah.
say. But it has to go back to some of our journalistic training and background, because, basically, that's the fun thing about being a journalist. I was like a young 20-something when I started journalism. I worked in the paper for 34 years. So, but you have this license to go ask people impertinent questions, especially politicians. You say, what did you mean by it? And more than likely they had to answer it somewhat. They would usually try and spin it, but journalists ask you these questions. They're nosy. So what did you think? And the basic question which I'm always trying to get is, how did you feel? How did you feel about that? Sometimes that's a hard thing to ask. Someone, a grieving mother, or calling up, a cold call, trying to say what happened, how are you feeling, that sort of thing. But if there is not a respect for privacy or that sort of thing, writers are curious. We want to know. So if we see something, it's probably going in a book. Right?
That's right. Yeah, as a reporter and talking to all sorts of people and sitting in board meetings, zoning board meetings, school board meetings, town council meetings, they could be boring, but there would always be this chance that somebody would say something that would be just great copy.
And that was what you're always looking for, is that piece, that line, that someone would say, that quote that you knew would make it the story or whatever. But someone was actually pretty honest and talked about what was going on with. So, and that is always helpful when you start going into the novelist realm. You can move things around. I did come across a nice Thomas Wolfe quote where, fiction is not fact, but it is fact arranged and selected. So, you've seen enough as a journalist that, this is what it feels like in a town. So, South Carolina town, this is how politics are done. This is how society worked, recently and even up into our own time. Here's how cell phones and texting go on.
Right.
And all that works together. You can see that.
Well, and I also taught journalism. I taught it actually at Furman University for a while, and it was really interesting to see how students looked at covering events, and how, this is like a whole other hour topic.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of going and covering an event and talking to all sorts of people and summarizing it is not easy.
Mhm.
And I'd forgotten, like, when you start out, it's hard to learn how to do that.
Yeah. But it's fun. But I think writing is the basis for it. It's always fun, and that's the joy about reading a book, especially a well-made book like Mindy has been able to do with this. You can see how it all weaves together, and it still surprises you at the end. But it feels like it could have happened. It does feel real and factual in that sense, even though it's made up, right?
Right. It's made up. Yep. Not real.
We do have time for one more question. I think I saw you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Question?
Mine or somebody else?
Yours, it was yours, sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm not an author by a long shot. My career was in engineering, but after I retired with no intents whatsoever, I stumbled into community theater, Edisto, and my son insisted I start a blog, write little essays, stories about things, and I did so, and my main course is humor. I've had a pretty happy life where no horrible things happen, and I even wrote a play that got put on at Edisto Beach and in the community theater there. And I've tried a couple of short stories, and I started another play. I never could bring it together at the end. A lot of funny things happened and a lot of inspiring things happened in it, in my opinion, but I couldn't figure out how to end it. And the hardest thing has always been for me in an essay or in the case of one successful play where someone helped me with this problem, and another one that has not been successful because I haven't finished it, is I can't figure out how to end anything. And is this a common problem, or is just something just as something that's maybe my particular weakness. Do you have any suggestions
The
there?
question is, how does one end something like a novel, right?
Right, that's a tough one.
I don't really have a problem with endings. I can try different endings out and eventually I'll find it. So I'll do the beginnings and the ending, just the middle. That takes so much work.
Yeah, generally I think I don't know where the ending would be, but I think what I'm always trying to reach is what feeling do you want to leave the reader
Mm.
with? You know, what is that last sort of?
Yeah, you
note?
don't want it tied up in a bow,
Yeah,
but you don't want it, totally just like a drop off,
Yeah.
which is kind of inconsiderate.
Maybe too narrow, and what I want to leave the reader with or the play attender, because I want them to be uplifted and it seems kind of trite to say, and then they all lived happily ever after. And I don't know how to delve into an area that's not light comedy.
so keep working at it. Remember, it took Hemingway 50 tries at the end of his novel. So.
I could give us a clue about your book, Kings of
Coweetsee? Yeah, this is set in a fictional county called Coweetsee. Bertie Barker Price is the docent there, heads the Coweetsee County Historical Society. She comes home to find a ballot box, this big old strong box on her front porch. Turns out it has a little slot in it. There's these ballots in there. This is from an election about 24 years before. It was probably stolen. There's always been this rumor going through Coweetsee County. And so she opens it up, of course, and all sorts of things, a Pandora's box of trouble and crimes and clues sort of go back to the stolen election. And it is sort of set, I think it's really focused on the women of Coweetsee, like Bertie. They're the men who have been in power forever. One sheriff who's been serving for 24 years until he's sent away for vote fraud. But it's the women who sort of, I think, power the book. And there's lots of old ballads. You're probably familiar with the ballads that are sung up in Madison County that go all the way back to Scotland and such. And these murder ballads are usually about women, pleading with their boyfriends, please don't take me down the river and knock me on the head and throw me in the river, right? There's lots of songs like that. And I always wonder why women would sing these songs, year after year, century after century. And as one of the characters said in here, Aunt Zip says, if you can sing about it, you can survive it. So there's a book about sort of this community, Coweetsee, is going through lots of changes politically and such, and emotionally, with what they're losing and the future. So that's a quick summary right there for you.
synopsis.
Thank
Thank you.
you, Dale. And we're getting to the top of the hour, so I just want to invite both of you for your final thoughts before we move on to book signing. And Dale, if you'd like to start, then we can give Mindy the last word.
Okay. I've always liked coming out and talking about books, and how they're made. Because when I sit and think about it, it's a very strange pursuit. I'm sitting there at a little desk, staring out the window a lot. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of stories began. Someone sitting there looking out the window, because that's physically how writers began their work. But then you have to sort of imagine a little bit further. So, but it does, as Mindy said, takes pluck and persistence. Year after year doing this, and you only do it because you love doing it. I love telling stories. I love writing books. This will be the 4th novel I've done. Again, I have a 5th novel coming out in October. One with a Stone Knife. It's my first attempt at a historical novel, sort of based on true history. About a Cherokee woman. This is the imaginary part I put in there. There were these Cherokee chiefs that did visit, the court of King George back in the 1700s. But I was imagining the Cherokee woman who might have accompanied one of those chiefs and then gotten stranded in England for 20 years and her struggles to get back to her homeland. So But again, thanks so much for coming out and listening to us and to Mindy.
Yeah, I just want to thank y'all for listening and asking questions, and hope that you'll feel immersed, and that my novel and Dale's novel too will sort of take you out of reality and let you just totally enjoy these pages. Just feel like you're somewhere else, watching someone else handle problems, not yours.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So thank you very much.